Let's bring in Democratic Congressman from Texas, Colin Allred. He's also running against Ted Cruz for Senate next year. Congressman, you wear a lot of hats. You are also a civil rights attorney. So what is your reaction to this move by Georgia Republicans in a key 2024 state, making Congresswoman McBath's current district more favorable for a Republican candidate? She says she's being blatantly targeted.
Yeah, well, thank you, Symone, for having me on. Yeah, I agree with Lucy. I think she is being targeted. But I want to go back to something that the Rev said in your last segment, which is that we fought for the right to vote. We fought to pass legislation that enshrined and protected our right to vote. And now it's time for us to fight to end things like partisan gerrymandering. And that's what I've been trying to do in my time in Congress. We passed the Freedom to Vote Act in the last Congress. We had 50 votes in the Senate. We couldn't get it past the filibuster. That would end partisan gerrymandering, as well as establish some national standards for early voting and vote by mail, how votes are counted, which y'all were also talking about on your last segment. We were empowered by the 15th Amendment to do that, which gave the Congress the power to enforce the article by appropriate legislation. So, listen, this is a time for us, I think, to stop relying on the courts to protect our values. We know the courts aren't going to be our backstop. They're not going to be the guarantors of our civil rights. Now it's time for us to do it affirmatively through legislation. Let's beat Ted Cruz. Let's put me in the Senate. Let's pass some of this important legislation.
You know, Congressman, you make a point about the courts and, you know, this map, particularly in Georgia, it was drawn after the judge ordered that another black majority district be added. It is one of many Section 2 cases that have been litigated across the country after that Supreme Court case in Alabama v. Milligan. What is the strategy here from Democrats? Is there a case for folks to say that this shouldn't give Republicans the right to shuffle around other districts because this is happening in Georgia? There's similar cases in Louisiana. There's a similar case in Florida. There is potential for some cases in Texas. I mean, this is a very real issue that is actively being played out all across the country.
Yeah, well, you're right, Symone. We're certainly experiencing it in Texas. We have some of the worst, I think, gerrymandered legislative districts in the country. And we're seeing it across the South, really not just in the South, though, across the country where we have single party control. And let me be clear, there are some Democratic controlled states that gerrymander as well. And I don't want them to do it either, because to me, partisan gerrymandering and the ability to gerrymander erodes folks' faith in our democracy and makes them think that their vote doesn't matter. It also suppresses the vote because when you have fewer competitive elections and people don't know who their member of Congress is anyway, then you see some of these lower turnouts in some of these really gerrymandered districts, and it produces the most extreme politicians that we have in the Congress now that are driving some of the dysfunction that we have. And so I know that I have some of my former colleagues who I know are litigating some of these cases, and I believe in them, and I think they are making the right arguments, and they will make the best arguments. I don't always believe in the courts that they're in front of. And that's why I think we have to move to the legislative front.
I do want to get you to weigh in. I mean, we've been talking a lot about on the ballots. There's all these 14th Amendment cases happening. You yourself, again, are on the ballot. I believe you all have a March 5th primary in Texas. What is your reaction to these 14th Amendment cases and the fact that a lot of Donald Trump's primary opponents, all of them actually, even Chris Christie, they have rushed to defend him. What does this say about the Republican Party writ large?
Yeah. Well, Symone, I think you know that I was on the floor on January 6th, the House floor, when that mob tried to break in. And when you're the only former NFL linebacker who's on the House floor and there's a mob trying to come through, folks look to you to protect them. And I actually sent my wife a text saying goodbye, basically, that I never thought I'd have to send in this job. We found out later that Mike Pence's Secret Service detail was sending the same sort of messages to their families. So there certainly was an insurrection that was led by folks like Donald Trump, but also Ted Cruz, who was one of the chief architects of the plan to overturn the election. And to me, this is actually our system working as it should, which is that some courts, like the Colorado Supreme Court, may make a decision. Some secretaries of state, like in Maine, may make a decision. And Mr. Trump has the right to appeal it to the United States Supreme Court. That's actually a functioning democracy working with a federalist system. But I think it's going to be ultimately up to the voters, up to our democracy itself, to purge this kind of idea that we're not going to accept elections, that we're going to move away from democracy itself, that we're going to try and overthrow elections, that for the first time in our history, we didn't have a peaceful transfer of power. Voters have to reject that again in this next election, and I'm confident that they will in Texas with folks like Ted Cruz and across the country.
I happen to still believe that in America, the people still have the power. Congressman Colin Allred, thank you so much for joining us today.